The forestry camps were among the worst camps. They were difficult for prisoners because not only did you have to work in the forest all day, you had to get to the forest. You had to walk from the camp to wherever it was they were cutting wood that day. And the walks themselves could often be a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles through freezing weather, heavy snow. The system in the camps was such that you were fed according to how much you worked. So you would have every day a norm. You had to cut X number of trees, or you had to build X amount of road. This system served well people who were peasants or people who had some physical, who were experienced with physical labor, because they could just about keep up with the norm and they could then get fed enough to make it through the day. The people who really suffered were people who were not accustomed to physical labor, and there was a kind of cycle they would fall into where they would not make the norm, they would not be fed, they would go out to work the next day hungry, they would do even less work, they would be fed even less, and eventually they would die. And that was how people died in the Gulag system. Not usually. Sometimes it happened that people were simply mass murdered or shot all at once, but usually people simply died of hunger and of exhaustion and of overwork. People were usually extremely badly equipped, particularly in the far north. There were never enough coats, there were never enough boots. Actually, the Gulag archives are full of angry letters from Gulag inspectors saying, in such and such a camp, only 30% of prisoners have winter boots, and they would, be angry about it. I mean, there was always a shortage of clothing. There was always a shortage of uniforms. There was also a shortage of tools. If you look at the tools that were used by prisoners, which are still preserved in 1 or 2 places, they're extremely primitive. So you would have saws, which are essentially a long piece of metal with kind of teeth cut into it, and sort of bits of wood on either side, and that would be what prisoners would use to try and cut down these enormous trees in the northern forests. So equipment was very bad, and that was another thing that slowed prisoners down. And people often spoke, for example, people wrote a good deal of having trouble walking because their shoes were so ill-fitting. They would wrap rags around their feet instead.